living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
A big part of how we are able to live our lives is based on something many of us take for granted: mobility. Mobility is defined as the ability to move or walk easily and freely, and it impacts our activities every day. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Beth Brown, and today we're going to learn about how to hold on to our mobility as we age. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining us this morning is our good friend, Dr. Doug Kunzweiler, Chief Medical Officer from Mountain Pacific Quality Health. And thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Kunzweiler.
Always good to be here. Thank you.
We love having you. So today we are talking about mobility. What factors can impact a person's mobility?
Well, some of the most crucial, of course, are your basic strength, balance, how flexible you are, what your range of motion of your various joints is like. Things like your vision, people don't think about that, but that's important to your mobility. Sensory nerve input from your feet and from your joints that tell your balance organ where things are at and how you're doing. So it's fairly complicated. Yeah,
it sounds like it. Does mobility change as we age no matter what?
Unfortunately, yes. It tends to get worse.
Yeah.
As we age, we tend to lose muscle mass. Our balance tends to become a little less sensitive. Our joints tend to get stiffer, and we tend to lose some range of motion. But the good news is that all those things are, at least to some extent, reversible with activity. So it's not as dismal as it sounds.
Good. That's good news. So when we talk about mobility, I'm sure a lot of people think walking, but more than that falls under mobility. Can you talk about what all mobility covers?
Yeah, it really encompasses all the activities of daily living. If you think about it, you have to have strength, balance, some flexibility to get out of bed in the morning, to bathe, to toilet, to dress yourself, to groom yourself, to open jars, to cook, to feed yourself. So it really affects all the activities of daily living. All of those are related to your mobility.
When does an older adult typically start dealing with mobility issues?
Well, to some extent, it depends on their history. If you've had significant injuries, that can impact your mobility. If your activity level, even in early life, has been pretty low, you're not going to be nearly as strong or as flexible as if you had maintained a higher activity level. Chronic illnesses, things like arthritis or diabetes can affect the nerve input from your feet, and that can affect your balance and your mobility. Some of the neurologic conditions like stroke, which can cause paralysis of some of your muscles, or Parkinson's disease, which particularly interferes with your coordination and your balance. So lots of different factors can impact it.
So it sounds like there are hopefully lots of different things people can do then to try to maintain some level of mobility.
Certainly.
So you mentioned activity.
Yes.
Can you talk about that and then maybe some other things that people can do?
Well, the main thing is to move. You have to use your muscles. The human body is very adaptable. If you put a workload on it, it will adapt to that workload. If it doesn't have to work, your muscles will atrophy and your balance will atrophy. But if you force them to work by doing something active, your muscles will get stronger, they will grow, your balance will get better, your joints will become more flexible. So the real key is activity.
Okay, is there anything beyond exercise that people should be thinking about when it comes to maintaining mobility?
Well, I think it's important that you talk to your primary care provider and get their advice about how to start and how active you can be safely. And they may even want to refer you to a physical therapist, especially if you have issues like joints that are stiff and aren't working, or old injuries or that sort of thing. You can get some professional advice and get a prescription for activity.
We always talk about some of the bad habits that might come up with alcohol, smoking, not eating well. Do those kind of things play into mobility?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We know that as your weight goes up, it gets harder and harder to be active, and that becomes sort of a vicious circle. The less active you are, the more your weight tends to go up. So that's something that you have to keep in mind and work on. Your joint flexibility, if you aren't very active, your joints tend to get stiff, and so you have to keep moving and keep working on flexibility, and that also impacts balance. You lose strength, you lose joint flexibility, that impairs your balance. So you have to work on all those issues.
Okay, great. And smoking, I would guess, would have to do with respiratory issues and being able to breathe.
Yeah, any chronic illness, things like high blood pressure, chronic lung disease from smoking, heart disease, diabetes, all these things impact all of those organs that are important in mobility, and so you have to work on all of those.
Okay, great. We are coming up on a break here in about a minute. Anything else, just basic mobility that maybe we haven't touched on that people should
Yeah, the thing I want to say is that sitting is the devil. We sit at home watching television, we sit in our offices, sit on the job, we sit in our vehicles while we are traveling around. And when you're sitting, your muscles are not working very hard. And the more you do that, the less strength you're going to have, the less mobility you're going to have. So the remedy for that is to get moving.
Okay, great. And I have heard that sitting is the new smoking. Is that true?
It's about as bad.
Yeah,
it's about as bad.
All right, that's pretty serious. Okay, we do need to pause here for a break, so thanks for all of that, Dr. Kunzweiler. When we come back, we're going to continue talking to Dr. Kunzweiler, but we're going to specifically talk about how mobility and your independence can go hand in hand and what you can do to stay as independent as possible. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. We're still talking with Dr. Doug Kunzweiler about mobility, and now we're going to talk about trying to stay independent, and that has a lot to do with mobility. So a lot of people want to stay in their home as long as they possibly can as they age. So let's talk a little bit about how mobility changes as we age and how that factors in with being able to stay in a home.
Yeah, we talked before about the activities of daily living, and all of those things require some strength, some balance, some flexibility, getting out of bed, getting dressed, toileting, bathing, grooming, driving to go shopping, cooking for yourself. Those all require that you keep your mobility up. And when you start to lose your mobility, either from disuse or from injury or some chronic illness, then you lose that independence and you need more and more help with those activities of daily living. And sometimes it gets to the point where you're really not able to stay in your home safely.
And related to this a little bit is falls. We've talked about falls on previous episodes, but can you talk a little bit about some of the risks at home when it comes to falls?
Yeah, sure. Some of the big risks are physical, things like loss of strength, impaired vision, loss of balance, loss of joint flexibility. And then there are also environmental factors, things like what sort of footwear do you have on? Are you wearing flip-flops? Are you wearing high heels, instead of some sensible shoes that keep you safe? What's the flooring like in your home? Do you have cords to trip over? Do you have throw rugs to slip on? And especially this time of year, we worry about ice and snow. Is it safe to be outside around your home? So those are factors that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm. And so let's connect the dots there as far as how falls relate to mobility. How is falling a risk to your mobility?
Well, the problem is that you injure yourself, you injure joints, perhaps you break bones, and then those have to heal. While they're healing, your activity level is impaired, and so you start to lose some of your muscle strength, you start to lose some of your balance, you start to lose some of your joint mobility, and all of that has to be rehabilitated to get you back to where you were.
So you mentioned earlier about talking to your primary care doctor. what do you bring up, or how do you even approach a conversation about mobility? What does that look like?
Well, if you think about it, mobility is just as important as any other aspect of your health. You know, if you're comfortable going to your doctor and saying that you're short of breath, you should be comfortable going to your doctor and saying that I'm having trouble getting around my home, or I'm having trouble with particular activities. And physicians, and for that matter, mid-levels, are trained in evaluating mobility issues. And if they don't feel comfortable addressing it themselves, they can refer you to physical therapy or occupational therapy, and those are the experts who can help you with your mobility.
Are there certain symptoms or things going on where a person would know it's time for me to talk to my doctor?
Certainly things can become obvious, but before you get to the point where you've lost function, you should think about going in earlier and asking your physician, what can I do to maintain the function I have right now? What should I be doing? What should I be worried about?
So you mentioned physical therapy a little bit. How does physical therapy help with mobility? Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's really what their profession is all about. They are experts at evaluating your strength, your flexibility, your balance, diagnosing problems with all of those things, and then helping you to develop a plan of activity that will help you to recover that lost function. And they're very good at teaching and telling you what you can do at home to maintain your function. So that's really what their profession is all about.
Okay, perfect. So we've talked a lot about the physicality of what happens when you lose mobility. Mm-hmm. How else does that loss impact a person?
Oh, it's profound. If you lose mobility, you tend to get more isolated. You find it harder to get out and to socialize. When that happens, you have problems with mood, depression. It's been linked to dementia. Your sleep is impaired. Everything really is affected.
So you talked earlier about talking to a doctor about maintaining mobility you have so that you don't lose more. Mm-hmm. Are there other steps you should take to try to maintain any mobility you currently have?
It really is all about moving. And, you know, the way I have always told people to begin is to just start walking. Most people enjoy walking, and if you can walk for 20 to 30 minutes at a comfortable pace most days of the week, you know, and I would shoot for 5 out of 7 days a week, that right away will start to have a big impact on your health, on your well-being. It will improve your balance, it will improve your strength. And then you can think about adding other things, perhaps joining a Y or a gym and doing some other specific classes, things like yoga or stretching classes. You can do some light resistance to build muscle mass. So there are lots of things you can do, but it just starts with becoming a little bit more active and then slowly building up the level of activity.
What about mobility devices? Can you talk about what's out there and how those might help?
Sure, there are tons of things that will help. There are lots of assistive aids that will help you with things like grooming, toileting, bathing, all that sort of thing. And then in terms of moving around, there are simple devices like canes, and as you progress and need more help, walkers. There are wheelchairs, or both manual wheelchairs, power wheelchairs. Some people even use Segways to get around. So there are lots of adaptive aids out there. Okay,
great. We're coming up on another break. Any final thought?
Well, in terms of adaptive aids, I would say use whatever preserves your function the most. In other words, if you can get by with a cane, don't use a walker. If you can get by with a walker, don't go to a wheelchair. Because again, if you stop using what mobility you have, you're going to lose it.
Okay, great, Dr. K.
So use it or lose it.
Yeah. Thank you. We appreciate all your insight.
Happy to do it.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to someone who uses a mobility device. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining us today to give us a personal perspective on this topic is Joellen Evenson, who used to be a nurse educator but also uses a mobile device. And thanks so much for being here with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's go ahead and jump in, Joellen. Can you share a little bit about how your mobility has changed over the years? So what is it like now compared to when you were younger?
Well, when I was younger, I grew up on a dairy farm in South Dakota. I'm the oldest of 10 children. So there was always a lot of things to do on the farm to keep active. And I also was a cheerleader, was involved with sports, all that type of thing, like normal kids do.
Yeah.
And when I graduated from high school, I went straight into the nursing profession. Then I got married, and my husband and I moved to Wyoming, where we raised 5 sons. And life was normal until I suffered my first of 3 smaller back injuries, as I called them. And from there, things just kind of escalated.
So when did you first notice that you were having some mobility issues?
Well, I still worked my regular job in med-surg and intensive care is where most of my back injuries happened. When you were lifting a lot of patients that aren't able to do it for themselves, and we didn't have a lot of devices that could help us with those lifts and turns. That's great that they have more of those today.
Yeah.
But I noticed little by little that my back was more sore at the end of shifts and things like that. And it wasn't until a very large patient fell on me that kind of put me out of commission.
So how would you say that impacts your daily life then?
Well, if I go into a little bit of how it all progressed from there, my first back surgery that they ended up doing, I was just squatting down to get some food out of the bottom basket of the refrigerator, and I couldn't get back up.
Oh, gosh.
I had to roll on the floor, and then my husband helped me back up. That's when I knew I was in more trouble than I thought I was. So they did more of kind of a minor surgery at that time. I had they call it discectomy, where they trimmed the disc, and life was good for about 5 years. I continued working, and then at the end of that 5-year period, it was worse again. So I ended up having a 1-level fusion. Well, a few months later, things just weren't going well again. So I went back to the surgeon, and they determined that I needed an additional level done. And it ended up being a 3-level fusion. And it also meant that I had a cervical spine fusion, 2 levels there. So they did the cervical spine fusion first, and then it progressed to the additional 2. So now it was 3 levels fusion. And I felt very well until I hit day 10 post-op. And then all of a sudden I ran high fevers. I was not feeling well at all. My husband took me back to the doctor, and it was determined that I had an infection of sorts. They didn't know until after they reopened me and did cultures, etc., with an incision and drainage, that I had a Staph aureus infection, hospital-acquired, as well as a MRSA infection.
Jeez.
And so that really was very life-threatening for me, which I look back on that and think how fortunate I was not to have had a worse outcome from that. But I ended up getting a PICC line, and it's the type of IV line that they put into your chest, the same as they would if you were on chemotherapy for cancer. Mm-hmm. But they put that PICC line in, and I received multiple different kind of IV antibiotics for a period of 8 months. And I did go back to work during that time too, and I was doing my IV therapy while I was working. And then at the end of 8 months, the doctors determined that I was probably fused well enough that they could go back in and remove the hardware, because prior to that, they couldn't remove that hardware. They had to deal with the infection that was present. So once they removed that hardware, it wasn't much later that it probably was determined it was too early to have removed that hardware. And I went into a scoliosis, which has just progressed over the years to a very severe state.
So can you talk about some of the different mobility devices then you've had to use over the years going through all of this?
Sure. At first I used like an aluminum walker, and aluminum walkers are made so that you walk slowly and distinctly, one step, two steps at a time. But I did what everybody else did. We're all in a hurry. We put those little yellow tennis balls on the front feet. And that's not what you're supposed to do with those aluminum walkers. It kind of defeats the purpose of it and almost makes it like a regular walker, except you can push it a little bit easier. I also have used a cane quite a bit of the time. And when I was working as a nurse educator, I often used a walker, and I put like a big crate on the top so I could carry books and all those type of things, because I was told to be on a 10-pound or 10 to 15-pound weight restriction. Well, it's kind of hard when you're lugging books and all that around. So into that crate, I would load it up, and then in my trunk of my car, I would unload it little books at a time, put the crate in the trunk, and then load it again. So, and then put the walker in my trunk and go on. So I used both a cane and a walker at that time. What I was finding as the time went on, I was becoming very slouched over, worse than ever, and almost to the point it was a little even harder to breathe. And so that kind of started my quest for something different. I didn't know what that was going to be until I found out that they make what they call a upright walker. And so I started using that, and that's what I'm currently using.
Great. So we're actually out of time here, Joellen, but just some quick advice that you would give to people who are thinking about using a mobility device.
Do your research. Go to the research that is out there. I went to stores that sold mobility devices. They are very helpful in showing what you tried. I tried the Up Walker. Sometimes the wheels are different. Use what other things will help you. I have drawers in my kitchen cabinets that roll out. I have a lot of other things that help me with my mobility. I try not to, I use the mobile cart in a store a lot of times because it is just so many steps to walk. And with scoliosis, it's like an additional 100 pounds according to the physical therapist that I'm carrying all the time. Mm-hmm. So I have to be kind of cognizant of that and not become too worn out. And let other people help you, because we sometimes have to do that, and do it with a smile, because you worked hard all your life. You deserve to be taken care of.
That's great advice, Joellen. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience with us.
You're very welcome.
And thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you'll come back and see us again next week. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Thanks, everybody.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.